In 2006, animator Justin Roiland created a short film for the monthly Channel 101 Film Festival depicting a hyper-adult, sexualized, and violent version of the characters of Doc Brown and Marty McFly from the Back to the Future film series. The response to the short was overwhelmingly positive and helped bring Roiland to the attention of Channel 101 founders Dan Harmon and Rob Schrab, who had made a name for themselves working on the Image comic title Scud the Disposable Assassin, as well as the failed pilot Heat Vision and Jack. A few years later, Harmon was approached by the executives behind Cartoon Network's Adult Swim programming block to pitch a concept for them. Harmon, in turn, would contact Roiland about turning the Doc and Marty short into a full-fledged series. Obviously, there was no way Universal Studios, who owns the Back to the Future franchise and the characters within, would allow for such a depiction to air on television. So the show would have to be retooled, with the network executives hitting on the idea that the Doc Brown character would be the Marty McFly character's grandfather rather than some weird eccentric inventor the teen would just spend most of his days hanging out with. To that end, Doc Brown became Rick Sanchez, a nihilistic, alcoholic, mad scientist inventor who would frequently draft his grandson, now named Morty Smith, into assisting him on his high-concept sci-fi adventures throughout space, time, and the multiverse. Morty, on the other hand, would just be striving to not only survive his grandfather's experiments, but also just being a 14-year-old in general. Rounding out the Smith family would be Rick's daughter, Beth Sanchez Smith, a veterinarian, Jerry Smith, a middle management nobody who is Morty's father, and Summer, Morty's older sister, who was conceived while Beth and Jerry were still in high school, forcing them to marry. The series would use the guise of wacky weekly sci-fi adventures to explore such topics as toxic masculinity, parental abandonment, and mental health, even going as far as to effectively change formats after its 6th episode, which saw Rick and Morty move to Dimension C-137, where that Rick and Morty had been killed in an accidental lab explosion while the rest of the Smith family was out of the house, after a love potion combined with a flu virus that resulted in the entire population of their Earth turning into Cronenbergian body horror creatures. Of course, what all of this means is that most of the theming just went over the audience's head, as many have gone on to hail Rick as a paragon of virtue, even though he's really not a good person at all. But that doesn't matter at all. He's Pickle Rick! Perhaps there is no greater tell to the cultural impact of Rick and Morty than the result of a scene in the 3rd season premiere of the Rick Shank Redemption, where Rick explained a fondness for a promotional Szechuan-flavored Chicken McNugget dipping sauce that McDonald's had used to promote the 1998 animated feature Mulan. When social media pressure caused McDonald's to bring back the Szechuan sauce in limited amounts, their restaurants wound up getting stormed to the point the sauce sold out very quickly, which in turn would lead to some emotional outbursts of rather insane proportions. I know there's a little more to it than that, but it just goes to show you how popular Rick and Morty has become in the public consciousness. In fact, it's become so popular that in 2015, Oni Press began publishing a Rick and Morty comic that served a unique distinction in that it's technically canon to the television series, even though it actually takes place in a different dimension, Dimension C-132. We'll explain the Rick and Morty multiverse a little bit more later. But today, we're going to look at the first volume of these comics. This is Rick and Morty, Volume 1. Jerry thinks it's about high time that Morty looked into getting a part-time job. Despite Morty's reservations and Rick's insults, Jerry remains firm. So Rick sets out to earn Morty a job the best way possible, by manipulating the intergalactic stock market. Rick produces a device to predict the future, thus allowing the two to see which stocks are going to spike. And soon, the two are heading off to a trading venue. However, soon upon arrival at said venue, the two run into a time detective known as Professor Talk. Obviously, Professor Talk is a reference to the long-running successful British television series Captain Scarlet and the Mysterians. Rick points out the professor can't pin anything on him or else he and Morty would already be under arrest, thus creating a paradox. Still, this furthers Morty's apprehension as he and Rick prepare to register in order to trade stocks. Unbeknownst to the two, the professor does look on from afar. A few weeks later, and Rick and Morty have made enough money that they have begun remodeling the Smith home, much to Jerry's annoyance. Morty has even gone so far as to hire a robotic feline secretary. However, it appears that the money has gotten to Morty's head as he's decided to fire Rick so that he can pocket more of the profit. Rick goes on to explain that his device doesn't exactly predict the future, but rather it merges timelines where the stocks that they pick are already popular. The device in turn then destroys everything else in the timeline except for the stocks. So, if Morty is comfortable having the blood of several billion other versions of himself on his hands, which he isn't, he can have the device. However, none of this turns out mattering, as Professor Talk got to Jerry, which really isn't that hard, and now is leading a police raid on the company. Rick and Morty try to switch the Catacriteria into battle mode as they prepare to switch universes again, but they are soon overwhelmed and arrested. When the two are brought before the Time Court, Rick attempts to buy the judge off by selling Morty as a sex slave. All this results in is a further charge against Rick and Morty, and the two are sentenced to prison at a place called the Clackaspire Labyrinth. Back at the Smith home, Beth is very upset with Jerry, not only for selling out her father and their son, but also for turning Rick's basement lab into a man cave. It doesn't matter, though, because in Jerryland, everything goes Jerry's way. Also, I'm sure that canister that Jerry accidentally knocked over while he was installing his mini-fridge won't come back to haunt anyone. Rick and Morty are taken to the Clackaspire Labyrinth, which is almost exactly what it sounds like, an eternally gigantic maze filled with various death traps. Rick pulls Morty out of a frog monster-infested pond and begins directing him through the maze, because it turns out Rick actually built this prison. The clue is actually in the name. Clackaspire is an anagram for Rick's place. The two pick up a change of clothes as well as some booze and begin trying to work their way to a secret location that can lead to a possible escape. However, bumping into another giant monster, the two find their way eventually to a portal generator Rick put in a secret room. Unfortunately, the portal only has enough power for one trip, so Rick shoves Morty through in order to save him. Morty proceeds to spend the next few weeks in a deep depression over Rick's apparent sacrifice. When Jerry attempts to hold a garage sale for Rick's possessions, Morty erupts to the point that he actually winds up getting grounded. Or maybe not, for you see, this isn't the real Morty. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, and no, this is not the bizarro Morty from the evil dimension who eventually tries to take over the Citadel, the universal focal point that's entirely populated by only Ricks and Mortys from various universes, by becoming president. It's completely different than that. Back at the Clackaspire, Rick works with a handsome inmate he admired on the ship over to retrieve a battery to power the generator again. Of course, once the thing is up and running, Rick proceeds to kill the guy. Meanwhile, on Earth C-132, Beth has set out to clean up Jerryland and dispose of her milquetoast spouse's furry magazines. It's then that she notices the broken canister, but before she can do anything, a large bug-like creature hugs the back of her head. Later, when Summer comes home, she finds the house dark and empty. She eventually manages to find Morty sitting at the dinner table, where he's constantly talking about joining a greater cause and being happy with everything. Sufficiently creeped out by her brother's actions, Summer ducks off and barricades herself in Morty's room, finding the real Morty in the process. Summer is then called out by what she thinks is her mother Beth, asking for help with Morty, only to find this to also be a ruse. Summer tackles her mother down a flight of stairs, and when the two land, blood begins pooling behind Beth's head. It's then that Morty leaps out and begins talking once more about assimilating all, only for Rick to pop up and kill the non-Morty with a blaster. Rick explains that this Morty was a cloner beast, and had he gotten out, he really would have taken over the Earth. However, when Summer begins to doubt that Rick is Rick, he blasts her with a stun blast and goes to grab the real Morty. The two then disappear through a portal as Jerry returns home from his golf game to the horrific scene. I hope you've enjoyed the Smith family appearances in these comics, because they're pretty much done for now, outside of a few backup stories, most of which aren't technically them. We get the original universe Summer fighting off Cronenbergian monsters and finding love along the way. Another parallel universe Summer trying to use experience leading a food uprising on another planet to get a managerial job at a taco stand. Rick and Morty traveling to a parallel universe where the roles are reversed, where Morty is the scientist and Rick is the underling, and Rick kills Morty. A Day in the Life of Jerry, which is just, well, sad. And Beth of Dimension C-132 participating in a punk band with her parallel universal selves. Rick takes Morty to a large plantation on another planet. Rick explains that the plantation was built to take in refugees from a destructive war that ravaged this world. However, recently Rick overheard the refugees attempting to overthrow him, so he needs Morty to go undercover and quash the revolt. Morty honors Rick's request and soon manages to fully integrate into the farm camp. He even manages to get close to an alien woman named Daphne, only for Rick to nearly blow it by revealing a wireless recording device located in Morty's pants. Morty throws away the slacks and enters a barn where Daphne reveals who it was that caused them to become refugees in the first place. Rick Sanchez. Are you really that surprised? Morty returns to Rick's mansion and begins packing things because he's done. Rick accuses Morty of being a literal wiener brain as the two walk out right into the pitchfork-wielding mob. Daphne pulls out a gun and, despite Morty's best efforts, shoots Rick through the chest. Morty cradles Rick in his arms as Rick manages to apologize for everything, even going as far as to admit that he does actually care for the Smith family very deeply before dying. It's then that Rick arrives through a portal. It turns out the Rick who's been working with Morty on this adventure was also a cloner beast who got free and got to Morty before Rick could. Anyway, the two need to leave as Rick started a war on this planet. He might not be too popular. The next thing Morty knows, he's at summer camp, where Rick is now a counselor. The cool counselor is willing to look the other way while the teens at Camp Camperson get down to the wacky, sexy shenanigans. Unfortunately, Rick winds up costing Morty a chance to hook up with one of the looser girls at camp named Lisa Canooglan. Yes, it appears that Morty has somehow traveled into the classic Bill Murray T&A summer camp comedy, The Razor's Edge. We also get a quick cameo from Bird Person, one of Rick's closest allies, who often aids him in battles against the Galactic Federation. That is until Bird Person was killed by his wife Tammy, who was revealed to be an undercover agent working for the Federation the whole time. Morty goes back to his cabin where he's mocked for striking out with Lisa. It's then that Morty starts hearing voices, which could lead to him being sentenced to a place called the Shack. He goes to Rick, who explains that Morty's just probably in a coma or something, which proves to be slightly truer than Morty thinks as he soon meets the voice in his head. It's Scary Terry, bitch. Scary Terry is the demonic killer based in the realm of dreams who often injects the word bitch into every sentence he uses to cover up for the fact that he's not particularly frightening. And of course, Terry is based on the lead killer in the classic Wes Craven horror film, The Hills Have Eyes. I think I've officially run that joke into the ground. Terry takes Morty to the Shack where psychic powers can't affect them, where he explains that there's a dimension where dreams is used as a fuel source, bitch. Unfortunately, bitch, it turns out that even dream energy is finite. So that led Terry to create Camp Camperson, bitch, where he can lure these dream drainers and take them out. However, this is where Morty comes into the picture, bitch, as it turns out the dream drainers can sense Scary Terry's psychic energy as long as he's not in the shack. However, this doesn't apply to Morty because he's also a dreamer, bitch. So Terry decides to transfer his powers over to Morty by bestowing his fedora upon him. To that end, Morty sets out killing various campers in viciously creative ways, bitch. Finally, he squares off with Rick, who points out that none of this makes any sense. How would killing off the Dreamverse actually save it? It's then that Morty wakes out of his coma to find Rick explaining that there is no Dreamverse. Because that's lame. And that concludes our look at Rick and Morty Volume 1. How was it? Well, I do think this is really evocative of the television show. The writing seems spot on, the characterization is right there, the artwork, I mean, probably because the show is animated, is right on there with the show. I think a lot of that works. It's really well paced, it's really tight, and a lot of these stories do feel like they could be episodes of the television series. I mean, outside of the Meatballs parody, I think that one's the only real clunker there, but still, like I said, it feels like they could be episodes of Rick and Morty. And I think that's kind of bolstered by the fact that, well, technically these are canon to Rick and Morty, just in a parallel dimension. I think that's a real novel idea. If there is one drawback, I do think, is that the supporting cast of Beth, Jerry, and Summer really do get the short end of the stick here. I mean, their story doesn't get much closure. Jerry comes home to find a bunch of dead bodies in his house, and that's it. Like, that's all we get. Never heard from it again. It just feels a little off. And I will admit, it's a little bit of a personal bias because Summer Smith is actually my favorite character on Rick and Morty. But still, it's like, it just feels like it doesn't get any closure to that at all. And, you know, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend to someone who isn't a fan of Rick and Morty to begin with. I think if you are a fan, you're really going to like this. But if you're not, it might leave you a little off feeling. And because of that, I am going to give Rick and Morty Volume 1 a B. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.